Come on, get your cockles. Je voudrais. Yeah, what's that? Les petits manger. Breakfast, is it? Deux billets. Two tickets, s'il vous plaît. Yeah, anytime, governor. Come again. Down and out in Paris and London. The podcast. Okay, chapter 16 then. Here we go with this one.
Time went on, and the auberge de Géant-Cottard showed no signs of opening.
So the time marker there, unspecified, but time went on, showing that narrative progression.
Boris and I went down there one day during our afternoon interval and found that none of the alterations had been done, except the indecent pictures, and there were 3 duns instead of 2. The patron greeted us with his usual blandness, and the next instant turned to me, his prospective dishwasher, and borrowed 5 francs. After that, I felt certain that the restaurant would never get beyond talk.
So more anticlimax here that we've come to expect this, haven't we? There's all this talk and then this anticlimax, and we have that here. So the patron, the person who is supposed to own the place, or does own the place, is now borrowing the 5 francs from his, from the prospective plongeur dishwasher. So there's a real irony there, isn't there, that this clearly is not going to happen. I think what we have to understand by these duns that are referred to, I read this as sort of bailiffs, as people coming to collect money from people who are in debt. So it's the fact that there are now 3 duns rather than 2 suggests there are even more people wanting money back from this patron. So it's even looking even more bleak for this restaurant.
The patron, however, again named the opening for exactly a fortnight from today, and introduced us to the woman who was to do the cooking, a Baltic Russian 5 feet tall and a yard across the hips.
Again, not a flattering description, is it, this one? A Baltic Russian 5 feet tall and a yard across the hips. I mean, she sounds almost square, the way that he's describing her there. So unflattering and focusing on physical appearance, not unlike Funder, but possibly more brutal than Funder.
She told us that she had been a singer before she came down to cooking, and that she was very artistic and adored English literature, especially La Casse de l'Oncle Tom. In a fortnight, I had got so used to the routine of a plongeur's life that I could hardly imagine anything different. It was a life without much variation. At 5:45 one woke with a sudden start, tumbled into grease-stiffened clothes, and hurried out with dirty face and protesting muscles. It was dawn, and the windows were dark except for the workmen's cafes. The sky was like a vast flat wall of cobalt, with roofs and spires of black paper pasted upon it.
This is an interesting section now, this paragraph, and in fact this whole page, but this particular paragraph is quite vivid. That simile there, then, the sky was like a vast flat wall of cobalt. Very, very novelistic. The sort of writing you'd expect to find in a novel, in a work of fiction. Very much aligned with Funder's style of figurative writing and use of figurative techniques to describe very real things. So she fictionalizes the facts, and that's what's happening here too with Orwell's narrative. Bit of pathetic fallacy as well, I think, there. The fact that the sky itself is flat and grey, representing the mood of the people, mood of himself certainly, and these drowsy men who are sweeping the pavements and so on and so forth. So you've got this figurative technique of using the weather to describe and emphasise the mood of the people.
Drowsy men were sweeping the pavements with 10-foot besoms, and ragged families picking over the dustbins. Workmen and girls with a piece of chocolate in one hand and a croissant in the other were pouring into the metro stations. Trams filled with more workmen boomed gloomily past. One hastened down to the station, fought for a place — one does literally have to fight on the Paris metro at 6 a.m. — and stood jammed in the swaying mass of passengers, nose to nose with some hideous French face, breathing sour wine and garlic.
Tasty. As if to, I mean, it's quite self-aware, as if to address that metaphor of fought for a place on the metro, and then in parentheses, one does literally have to fight on the Paris metro. So you've got this metaphor, but then also a literal meaning as well. So reinforcing the metaphor with the literal, no, really have to actually fight. So very self-aware and self-conscious writing and use of figurative techniques. Clearly a novelist, George Orwell, known for his novel writing, and clearly that's something which is very hard for him to repress. Unlike Funda, who isn't known for her novel writing as such, but she too seems to can't resist the poetic urge to describe things figuratively.
And then one descended into the labyrinth of the hotel basement and forgot daylight till 2 o'clock, when the sun was hot and the town black with people and cars. After my first week at the hotel, I always spent the afternoon interval in sleeping, or when I had money, in a bistro. Except for a few ambitious waiters who went to English classes, the whole staff wasted their leisure in this way. One seemed too lazy after the morning's work to do anything better. Sometimes half a dozen plongeurs would make up a party and go to an abominable brothel in the Rue de Sayes, where the charge was only 5 francs 25 centimes, 10 halfpenny. It was nicknamed Le Prix Fixe, and they used to describe their experiences there as a great joke.
Interesting there that even their leisure time, shall we call it, is going to this abominable brothel where it's very cheap. They're drawing on that pun of the restaurant, the Le Prix Fixe, the fixed price menu, applying something from their world, the semantic field of food and restaurant and catering, to this debauched world of the brothel. So just that interesting borrowing there of that phrase and using that phrase, that colloquialism that's so familiar to them as restaurant workers, into this other sordid world of prostitution.
It was a favourite rendezvous of hotel workers. The plongeurs' wages did not allow them to marry, and no doubt work in the basement does not encourage fastidious feelings. For another 4 hours one was in the cellars, and then one emerged, sweating, into the cool street. It was lamplight, that strange purplish gleam of the Paris lamps, and beyond the river the Eiffel Tower flashed from top to bottom with zigzag sky signs, like enormous snakes of fire. Streams of cars glided silently to and fro, and women, exquisite-looking in the dim light, strolled up and down the arcade.
So more lovely figurative language here. The sensory imagery, the purplish gleam of the Paris lamps, the zigzag sky signs like enormous snakes of fire. So there's sort of zoomorphism, but also metaphor as well, isn't it? The idea of snakes on fire, snakes of fire reaching up and down the Eiffel Tower. So it's very vivid and lurid imagery to describe this, and compared to the sordid, dim, dingy world that they've been in, this seems so fresh and luxurious, as he says himself, that you emerge sweating into the cool street after you've been in the cellars, the dingy, sordid atmosphere of the cellars.
Sometimes a woman would glance at Boris or me, and then, noticing our greasy clothes, look hastily away again. One fought another battle in the metro and was home by 10. Generally, from 10 to midnight, I went to a little bistro in our street, an underground place frequented by Arab navvies. It was a bad place for fights, and I sometimes saw bottles thrown, once with fearful effect, but as a rule the Arabs fought among themselves and let Christians alone. Raki, the Arab drink, was very cheap, and the bistro was open at all hours, for the Arabs, lucky men, had the power of working all day and drinking all night. It was
hang on a second. Yeah, look at that parallelism there of working all day and drinking all night. I mean, this is true. It's presumably it's half true at least. It's hyperbolic. You'd assume they're not drinking all night and working all day, but who knows? But certainly that parallelism helps to create that image as being kind of sealed and done almost. It's like what's the French phrase? Fait accompli, is it? Where it's sort of it's done and dusted. And by having that parallelism, it sort of makes it seem more true, and that's just what they always do.
Typical life of a plongeur, and it did not seem a bad life at the time. I had no sensation of poverty, for even after paying my rent and setting aside enough for tobacco and journeys and my food on Sundays, I still had 4 francs a day for drinks, and 4 francs was wealth. There was, it is hard to express it, a sort of heavy contentment, the contentment a well-fed beast might feel in a life which had become so simple.
A couple of things here. You've got the anadiplosis of the contentment, a heavy contentment, the contentment of a well-fed beast might feel. So the anadiplosis there to push that word contentment, and the zoomorphism of comparing himself to a well-fed beast.
For nothing could be simpler than the life of a plongeur. He lives in a rhythm between work and sleep, without time to think, hardly conscious of the exterior world. His Paris has shrunk to the hotel, the metro, a few bistros, and his bed. If he goes afield, it is only a few streets away on a trip with some servant girl who sits on his knees swallowing oysters and beer.
There's an interesting point to be made there. Not so much of a literary technique, but just the way that they're living their lives. It's like the apartments these people live in, like our narrator here, and like Boris and all the others. It's like a microcosm. They're living in filth and squalor. They're going to work in filth and squalor, and they're returning home to filth and squalor. And so their living conditions are no different to their working conditions. It's just a microcosm of the greater Paris. And Paris, for all it serves as a synecdoche in the sense that Paris, as an idea, represents, well, liberty, equality and romance and all those things. And actually what we have here is very different to that. There's very little freedom, there's very little equality, and there's very little romance in this, clearly. So you've got this dichotomy between the idea of something and the reality of something. And that's not so much what Orwell's presenting, but it's just it's just the ideas as we read this, isn't it? That what we're given here is a very different version of Paris than perhaps we would expect to read. And that's why it's interesting, I think.
On his free day, he lies in bed till noon, puts on a clean shirt, throws dice for drinks, and after lunch goes back to bed again. Nothing is quite real to him but the boulot, drinks, and sleep. And of these, sleep is the most important.
So that triadic structure there of boulot, drinks, and sleep, and the incrementum of the fact that sleep is the most important thing to him, to the plongeur? Yeah, the plongeur.
One night, in the small hours, there was a murder just beneath my window. I was woken by a fearful uproar, and going to the window saw a man lying flat on the stones below. I could see the murderers, 3 of them, flitting away at the end of the street. Some of us went down and found that the man was quite dead, his skull cracked with a piece of lead piping. I remember the colour of his blood, curiously purple, like wine. It was still on the cobbles when I came home that evening, and they said the school children had come from miles round to see it.
Interesting that the simile there is drawn from food and drink as well. So the blood is curiously purple, like wine. So, well, there's more bodily fluids there if you want it. Not that I'm sure you do. But then also compared to wine, which is in the semantic field of cooking, isn't it, and catering. So it's almost like that's their only reference point, really. There seems to be wine sloshing around everywhere in this book, certainly in this first half.
But the thing that strikes me in looking back is that I was in bed and asleep within 3 minutes of the murder. So were most of the people in the street. We just made sure that the man was done for and went straight back to bed. We were working people, and where was the sense of wasting sleep over a murder? Work in the hotel taught me the true value of sleep, just as being hungry had taught me the true value of food. Sleep had ceased to be a mere physical necessity. It was something voluptuous, a debauch more than a relief. I had no more trouble with the bugs. Mario had told me of a sure remedy for them, namely pepper, strewed thick over the bedclothes. It made me sneeze, but the bugs all hated it and emigrated to other rooms.
So you've got the hardness here that evolves in our narrator, a sort of hardness to his response to real world affairs, and like the murder in the street below, the fact that he's back asleep again in 3 minutes because he can't afford not to be, and he's sort of making the point, I think, although quite implicitly, that this is the life of a hard-working person, a hard working class person, hasn't got the time or the energy or the resources to think about the bigger picture. And that might be more of a sort of reflection on socialism and reflection on capitalism possibly as well, that by keeping, it'd be interesting to look at this from a Marxist perspective, that by keeping the proletariat hard in labour, you're actually avoiding or limiting their perspectives and limiting their ability to think openly and creatively in that way that would then challenge the status quo. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, really, that those who are too busy working for the system therefore can't change the system because they're too busy working and haven't got the time or the luxury to think or do anything about it. And that's kind of the point being made. That's what I read from it anyway. It might just be that he's so tired he has to go to sleep, but I just think there's a bit of a reading there to be made from a socialist perspective, knowing Orwell's background and style that he's going for and certainly carries on to do in his other works that he writes. So that's it for chapter 16. Back again next time for chapter 17. Let me have a quick look ahead, see what we've got. Oh yeah, plenty to say on chapter 17. So I'll see you for that one. Bye for now.